We continue our study in the book of Romans this morning. We're in Romans chapter 8, our second week in that chapter. We'll have at least one more week. But we're looking specifically this morning at Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 30. And as we looked at those first 17 verses last week, Paul was leading us into this discussion about life through the Spirit and how that results in a different view of life. And as we develop that new view of life compared to how the world views life, then we begin to develop a new way of life. Well, we continue looking at this different view, this different way of life, and the results that that has as we pick up with verse 18 this morning. So Paul writes, Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 25, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. Now we know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. And not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly, as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship and the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Paul says as we begin to look at life differently, as we begin to live life differently, then the issues of today are dealt with not in light of one another and how much somebody else has it better or worse than us, but in comparison to what heaven's going to be like. Have you ever noticed that our level of patience seems to be directly related to what we view as being the reward for exercising that patience? We go out to eat, we go to the steakhouse, 30-minute, 45-minute wait just to get in, no problem. Why? Because there's a great steak waiting at the end of that. That wait just gives me a few more minutes just to really get ready, so I'm really hungry, really ready to enjoy it. And who knows, maybe that's why it ends up tasting so good. But a 10-minute wait in the line at the grocery store, waiting on 2 or 3 people in front of me to check out, a lot shorter wait, but I don't have the patience for it. Why? Because I've still got to go home and cook. I know that there's still cleanup to do when all that's said and done. The reward for that 10-minute wait doesn't seem as great as the reward for the 30 to 45-minute wait at a steakhouse. And Paul says, as we begin to live life, when things seem to be difficult, when the struggles are pressing in upon us, and we feel like we're suffering, don't compare it to now. Compare it to what is it that I'm waiting for? What is it that I'm hoping for? What is it that is going to make all of this worth it? And Paul is making the point that everything we experience here, when it's happening to us on God's behalf, because we're living as Christians, because we don't fit in, because our views are the same as God's views, he says it's all worth going through because the end result is heaven. The greatest reward of patience that there is. The trouble that we face in the wait seems longer and longer. The closer I get to the end of that 45-minute wait at a steakhouse, the more my frustration begins to build. The more it begins to override that patience. Well, they told me 30 minutes, but it's been 25. I've seen a lot of people leave. There's got to be a table for two in there. Come on, take me on in. How's that person going in? I was here before them. We begin to lose our patience. We begin to lose our ability to deal with the struggles of the moment because I forget about the reward. I begin to focus on self. I begin to focus on the moment and the struggles that are happening right now. And Paul says the reason that the wait goes on is because God is trying to liberate as many people as possible. He's trying to save as many from death and destruction as he can. And so, we come to the reminder that we are saved based on that hope. We're waiting for the final completion. Faith and hope have their result of heaven. The result is being saved. It's what enables us to keep enduring while we're waiting to receive that final reward. The day is coming. It's one day closer every day when it will no longer be hope. When faith is no longer needed because it's all been fulfilled. But Paul's reminding us, in the meantime, we just have to keep on keeping on. Hold to the faith. Hold to the course that God has laid before us. And the good news is, and this is the next thing Paul brings us to, and it's something he's already introduced to us last week, but that's that we're not left to wait alone. When you're waiting at the restaurant, when it's just you by yourself waiting 30 minutes to get in, that's a tough wait. When there's somebody else with you or several other people with you, and you get into those conversations and the other things that can distract you from the wait, life is better. And so Paul says, Romans chapter 8, verse 26, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. We're given God's Spirit to dwell within us, to always keep us company, to always keep us focusing on what the reward is, to have that mindset. And to help us in those moments where we're struggling with the problems of the moment, because that Spirit is interceding on our behalf. When I don't even begin to know how to pray what I need to pray to get me through the moment, it's okay. The Spirit's there, groaning on my behalf, guiding me through, helping me through, knowing the mind of God, working us through those moments. And that gives us a reminder of hope. Look with me at verse 28. And we know, this is one of those passages we all like to lean on. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Temporary pause. We know that in how many things? All things. God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called, and those he called, he also justified, and those he justified, he also glorified. Let's take just a moment and work backwards through these verses. And then we'll come back to verse 28. Verse 29 and 30 deal with this term of predestined. And we've looked at this term in some other studies, and we've got to realize this is not an individual predestination. This is not God looking down and saying, I'm going to save you and I'm going to save you, but I'm not going to save you. God's not picking and choosing just based on I like you and I don't like you. Nothing you can do will change that. That's not the concept Paul was talking about. God's desire is that all men will be saved. Paul told us just a moment ago in the earlier verse that this world is subject to frustration because God is delaying the end so that he can try to save as many as possible. So if it's not individual predestination, if it's not God selecting individually at his own discretion who he's going to save and not save, what is the scriptural context that Paul is using this in? And predestination in its scriptural context is always referring to God predetermining the plan, the way in which man is to be saved. Before he ever created, before he ever said, let there be, God said, here's going to be the plan for saving my creation. For that special part created in my image, for it to be able to come back and to come home. He determined beforehand that Jesus would die on the cross. He determined beforehand that it would be through faith that man would come to believe in what Jesus did. That through that faith, he would respond in obedience through baptism. All of those parts that we've been talking about, all of those things that Paul has been tying together here, the Scripture reveals over and over and over again. That is the predestined path. Not who is saved just because God says, I want to save you and I don't you. But God's setting down the rules ahead of time, saying, this is how you're going to be saved. If you love me, if you follow my commands. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. It's all connected together. And so Paul's saying, look, God has called us. He laid out the plan. He predestined everybody to be able to be saved through the same plan. And he's called us to that plan. And those who answer the call and come to the plan and follow through the plan are justified. Those who are justified are glorified. Those are the ones he's talking about, verse 28. When he gives us this great promise, I have a computer problem, sorry. When he gives us this great problem, it says, all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. What a comfort that is intended to be for us as Christians. The ability to know that regardless of how the moment seems on the surface, to know that God is creating something good out of everything that happens. With patience, with endurance, with time, with the Spirit, we will see what that goodness is. And we're going to see next week that this is not a passage that promises that only good things will happen to us. And sometimes we begin to take passages and promises like this and we begin to twist them in our mind to say something that they don't say. Paul's going to give us a lot more clarification on that next week. And so I hope that you'll be back next week. I hope that you'll join us on the videos again next week and see what Paul is really trying to tell us with this promise. So the lesson sure.